The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sylvia Roger and I'm the Director of Research and Education at the Cooperative Research Centre for Living with Autism, which we shorten to Autism CRC. Welcome to today's webinar series for Autism Awareness Week. Today's session focuses on the school years, and we're very lucky to have three of our key researchers within Program 2, School Years Program, with us today. I'll introduce them in a moment. But just before we do, there are a few items that we'd like you to know about to help you participate in today's seminar. We've taken a screenshot as an example of the attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on your own computer desktop in the right-hand corner. If you're listening in using your computer speakers, that's generally the default. But if you need to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed to you. During the webinar, you'll have the opportunity to submit questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the question pane of the control panel. You can send your questions in any time during the presentation and we will collect these and give them to the panel at the end at the Q&A session. The Autism CRC is building capacity and developing appropriate educational environments and programs for a social, behavioural and academic success of students on the spectrum. We're working with students, parents, school systems, teachers and allied health professionals who work in schools to develop these programs and resources and to research them in order to support the success of students on the spectrum at school and beyond. So today we're very excited to share with you some of the research that we are undertaking. This will provide an overview of some of the latest evidence-based whole classroom interventions that are being developed and researched within the Autism CRC to assist children on the spectrum in everyday mainstream classrooms. Our panel presenters are Debra Costley, who you'll see in the left-hand video, and Debra is at Aspect, or Autism Spectrum Australia. She's going to talk to us about the challenge of transition in classrooms and the latest research outcomes to support teachers. Here with me in the room we have Dr Beth Saggers from Queensland University of Technology, and she's going to share with us learnings from a large educational needs assessment across Australia that she headed. And on my far left is Dr Renae Beaumont. Renee is at the University of Queensland and she is the brains behind Secret Agent Society and the Whole of Classroom program, which is just under development and now in trial. So first of all, I'm going to move to Dr Saggers. Dr Saggers was originally a primary and special education trained teacher and she's worked with a whole range of educational age groups. She has almost 30 years teaching experience with students on the autism spectrum. She's worked in all phases of schooling, from early intervention through primary and secondary schools and in a diverse range of educational settings. For many years she worked as an advisory teacher for autism in Queensland. Beth is a very active participant in Autism CRC's School Years program. As I mentioned before, she led the Autism CRC Educational Needs Analysis, which she'll talk about today. But she's also leading a behaviour support project for the early years and is very involved in the School Connectedness project. She's been a critical friend to the robotic social clubs in mainstream schools as well. Since the beginning of 2014, she's taken on the chair of the Research Advisory Group for AEIOU Foundation for Children with Autism. And today she's going to talk to us about some of the key findings of the Australian Autism Educational Needs Analysis, which was a national first and has provided us with a baseline of students' needs from the perspective of students, teachers and parents. Thanks, Beth. Thank you.
Okay, so as Sylvia said, this is talking about the Educational Needs Analysis project, which is now being finished. And one of the key aims was to actually identify from a range of different stakeholder groups the views of the educational needs of students on the autism spectrum from the ages of 5 to 18 years. That was its focus. So what we actually did was we looked at 4 key stakeholder groups, including educators, specialists, parents and students on the spectrum themselves. And one of the key aims was also to help inform 3 subsequent projects, one around the early years behaviour support, one around middle years behaviour support and the school connectedness project. So it was an Australia-wide educational needs analysis. So we were trying to look at as many different educational organisations across the nation as possible. So one of the reasons why this research is so important is that firstly it's the first time globally that something's been done on such a wide scale. It's a nationwide analysis, and it's also the first time that 4 different stakeholder perspectives have been identified and analysed around what they consider are the needs of students on the spectrum. It will also help in a number of different ways to in the translation of this knowledge in future professional development and also in practice. So it will also help us to build capacity around successfully educating students on the spectrum and developing appropriate educational environments to support them to achieve both academically and socially to their maximum potential. It also will help the Australian schools to deliver a quality education program to students, but also it will help with self-efficacy with teachers that are involved in the education of students on the spectrum by tailoring professional development to meet the educators' needs, and also specialists that are working within schools and the needs that they have around professional development. It helps the teachers themselves to feel like they can develop and coping mechanisms that will actually help them feel more satisfied and confident, and also will provide, we will be developing resources and training around the findings of this project as well. Okay, so some of the preliminary findings that we'll talk about today. Overall there was 1,468 respondents, of which the majority were parents. So the parents, there was 934, as you can see on the slide, 248 educators across Australia, 179 specialists and 107 students on the spectrum. These participants came from all of the educational organisations across Australia. Every state of Australia was represented and every educational organisation was also represented in that cohort. So there's some key things that really stand out in the needs analysis, and these are on the right-hand side of the slide. So the social, emotional and behavioural needs were identified by all participant groups as having the biggest impact and requiring the highest levels of support in school settings. Some of the top 3 supports that were commonly identified by the participants were, there was a very strong representation that teacher aid support was used quite a lot in classrooms to support the needs of students on the spectrum. In-class support, whether that be from the teacher, the class teacher themselves, a teacher aide or a specialist input, was also significant. And the third thing that came up as a common support was behaviour support. In relation to behaviour support, the other key element with that was that it was considered an essential element to supporting students on the spectrum. And another finding that that is coming out of the data at the moment is the significance of positive behaviour support in helping to support and develop school connectedness for students on the spectrum. So there is a perception that if positive behaviour supports are put in place in schools, that there is more likelihood that the students on the spectrum will feel a connection with the school, which actually helps with maintaining good mental health and well-being. Okay, so of the 107 students on the spectrum who completed the survey, they were aged from 12 to 18 years of age, and they identified some key things that helped or hindered their participation in classroom environments. So from the point of view of the things they identified as the hardest tasks for them to do, a lot of those things related to some of the executive function skills that were required. For example, a lot of the planning and organisation that's needed to complete a lot of classroom tasks. So one of the things that came up quite strongly was planning for assignments. That was a significant issue for them, so the planning and organisation around that. From a social perspective, working as part of a group was highly one of the hardest tasks as well. And then there was also a lot of issues in relation to handwriting, whether it be maintaining neatness of handwriting or with actually how quickly they had to handwrite. They were key issues for them as well. The other thing that came out strongly was the difficulties coping with change within the classroom environment, whether that be changes in the teacher or timetable or transition events that occurred within classroom environments. These were all things that the students identified as being very hard to deal with. From a social perspective, the dealing with bullying or teasing came up as a significant event as well. Copying information from the board, which is also influenced by handwriting, was also significant. Doing homework came up time and again as an issue. And then managing anxiety, staying calm when other kids annoyed them, or staying calm in classrooms that were very noisy, were all significant tasks that the students identified as being part of those top 10. When they were asked what were the most helpful strategies, a number of things, there's some common themes that come up. The first one is the ability to be able to use technology to help with schoolwork, but also with helping to handwrite. The other thing that stands out when you listen to the student voice is the fact that having long-term access to technology throughout the school day, rather than what often happens within a classroom environment where you have access for periods of time through the day. They wanted the access to technology to be far more ongoing within the classroom environment. Another significant thing that the students identified, which is the ability to be able to take a break, take a break from the academic demands of the classroom away from the bigger group, was quite significant, and that was sort of linked in also with our ability to be able to take time away from others when they needed it. So that access to that was quite significant for students as a helpful strategy for them in classroom environments. They also highlighted that they did find being alerted to changes in the environment quite important, and being able to get copies of things that the teachers were writing on the board was quite a helpful strategy they identified as well. From an executive function point of view, they really wanted to have that help to organise themselves, planning of assignments, planning of the timeframes required, planning of organisation of themselves and their belongings within the school day were quite significant supports for students that they identified. They also identified that receiving rewards for doing something well was a very helpful strategy for them, as well as having quiet spaces to do assessment and one-on-one help from an adult when they needed it. Whereas often people perceive that if you're teaching students in an inclusive environment, that means they need to be in a whole group all the time. And the students themselves are identifying that inclusive doesn't necessarily mean that. It means meeting their needs. Extra time for assignments was also very significant for the students, and also help with organising their assignments was a key. So in summary, one of the significant things around the needs analysis was there was a lot of information that we collected from both specialists, parents and teachers, educators, around professional development. What professional development had they received, what professional development would they like, what topics would they prefer that professional development to be on, and how they would like that professional development to be delivered. So that really is quite significant in helping us to inform the future content of professional development for both educators, parents and allied health professionals. That will be very informative to help tailor that professional development to meet their needs. It will also help with making sure that that professional development is done in a style that and is delivered in a way that is preferred by those particular personnel. The other thing is that it will also inform the content of the professional development, because there was a number of significant findings around academic and learning needs, social and emotional needs, communication needs, sensory needs, and the other things that are listed on the slide that will help to give us information to inform future professional development for staff that was identified by key stakeholders across Australia. This information is also currently being used to inform the Early Years Behaviour Support Project, which is currently underway in 2 states, in Queensland and New South Wales, and has provided a good baseline for that project and some of the needs of key stakeholders such as educators and professionals involved in that project, as well as a potential future project in that area around the middle years. It's also currently being used for the School Connectedness project, which is looking at school connectedness for adolescents on the autism spectrum, and that it's providing a good baseline for that project. It has information that is useful for the current transition project as well.
Great, thanks very much, Beth. As Beth said, this particular survey was very critical to us to get this baseline information from multiple stakeholders, and that's certainly an emphasis of Autism CRC, that we're a cooperative research centre, but we also collaborate with stakeholders, end users, people who are to benefit from the research need to be involved in informing us about what the key priorities are. And as Beth has already alluded to, transition and social aspects of and social needs are 2 of the really key issues that students on the spectrum have to deal with. So we're going to move on to talk to Debra, for Debra's to present on transition, and then later Renee's going to talk more about social needs and some of the resources and interventions that we're looking at in that area. So moving to Debra Costley. Debra's with us from Sydney. Debra's a special educator by background with almost 30 years experience in special education, teaching and research. She undertook a PhD in England and Wales, looking at the evaluation of the national curriculum in those 2 countries and the impact of that curriculum on the learning needs of children. Debra's worked in special schools, in further and higher education in the UK, the US, as well as in Australia. And she spent some time at the University of Western Sydney as a principal research fellow and a senior lecturer there, and she spent some time in Warwick in the UK as a principal research fellow as well. In her current role as National Director of Aspect Practice at Autism Spectrum Australia, she has responsibility for applied research across the Aspect organisation, the development of models of service delivery for children and adolescents, and she is actively involved in as many as 18 CRC projects across 3 programs of research, from early identification to transition and adulthood. She holds a conjoint senior lecturer position at the Faculty of Psychiatry at the University of New South Wales and is a research fellow at Sydney and Wollongong universities. So today Debra is going to talk to us about transition practices for teachers and some of the research that she's heading in the transition area. Thanks, Debra.
Okay, thank you. So it's really important for us to think about transition when we're talking about working with young people on the autism spectrum. I think my first question on the next slide is, why is transition so hard? And I think the first thing to say is change is difficult for everyone. We all find it difficult to move from one activity to another, or to change our circumstances, even to change where we're sitting in an office. You know, sometimes we find very difficult. So change, we know, is a difficult thing. And one of the things that I found that I thought explained this really well is that change is an external event. It's something that somebody else says is going to happen to you, whereas transition is actually the internalization of that. It's your emotional processing to actually go through that to work out how to deal with the change. So it's really important for us to think about transition as a bit more than just changing things. So, you know, when people sometimes say, well, why do young people on the autism spectrum struggle with moving from one lesson to another or from year to year in school, it's because of that internal emotional change that needs to take place, and that's what we need to support them with, and particularly given the added challenges that they have due to the difficulties sometimes with social interaction, with communication, as we've already heard from Beth, and sometimes with their inflexible patterns of thinking and behaviour. They're very fixed on a particular activity, and you can imagine it's hard for all of us to switch very quickly, but if they're doing an activity in the classroom and suddenly someone says, okay, you need to stop writing that story you're really engrossed in and move on and do maths or PE activity or whatever it might be, that movement is really hard for them to do that quickly. And part of it is also linked up with the executive function things that the survey Beth has just talked about, highlighted is difficult for our students because the planning, the organising, the being prepared for the next activity is something that they need more support with. So transition is really important. It happens every day and it happens year on year in schools. So to move on to what we will actually be researching, we wanted to make sure we looked at something that would be of value to the teachers in mainstream schools and to the students that they work with. We know that there's quite a lot of work helping people to transition from early years into primary school, and there's also a lot now primary to secondary schools. There's quite a lot of attention has been paid to that. What doesn't happen then is that transition support doesn't necessarily continue through school, whether that's primary or secondary school. And I certainly know from the Aspect Educational Outreach team that a lot of the calls we get from mainstream schools for additional support come in at year 8 in secondary school, or they come in at year 2, 3 in primary school, because a lot of support's been given in those first years and then people are assuming it's done. Transition has been done, they're in the school. But actually, as I've just said, for those young people, transition is happening all the time, and so we need to make sure we've got supports to help transition through school, not just into particular years. So it's really important we make sure we give those supports. And so we've already started with our research team looking at what sorts of supports might be of value to mainstream school teachers, and there are already so many of them. You know, the research assistants keep saying to me, I found this package and it's got so many different resources in it. Should we use the whole package or should we break it up? And that's, you know, they've got time, it's their job to look at all of these packages and to research them and look at the evidence base for them. If you think about a classroom teacher that is already highly motivated to support their students but has to do the curriculum planning, has to do individual learning plans for particular students, to actually ask them to look at all the varied resources that are available and be able to evaluate those and know which to use is actually quite a big ask. So that's something we're hoping we can shortcut through this project. So what we aim to do is to identify a series of teaching practices. Sorry, jumped too quick. Previous slide. To identify a number of teaching practices that will actually help teachers to support the whole class, because I think, as all of us who've taught in any kind of education setting will know, that if you've got good pedagogy and good practice that supports children on the autism spectrum, it's also good practice for all students. So that's what we're aiming for. We'll be trialling these practices. First of all, we will identify them and get them validated by an expert panel, and then we'll actually, the ones that go through that panel will be trialled in practice in 6 regional, 6 metro schools in New South Wales, Queensland and Victoria. So the next slide we'll talk a bit more about what we will be doing. So what we will aim to do, as I say, is to produce a set of critical transition practices that will support inclusion in school. So I think it's really important. We've actually firmed up a lot with this research project what we think is really important, and we think it's important that we've got practices that support keeping kids in their classroom and working alongside their peers. We don't want to just have a few practices that support year-on-year movements. We want this to be through their whole school year and through their school life. So we will be developing practice briefs, and each of these practice briefs I see as a kind of like an A4 size amount of information, but it'll be electronic. They'll be based on the outcome of trials with over 72 teachers in mainstream schools, and they will include information on what to teach. So those will be the models of transition practice that we've identified, but how to teach them for success. And also, if you do this in this way, you'll get better results than if you do something else. And also there will be the opportunity to include video modelling clips, which for some particular transition and models of practice we might need to demonstrate for teachers, well, this is how you would do this particular activity with a student. Other things, for example, if visual schedules turns out to be one of the models of practice that we think helps to support student transition, with a visual schedule we might just need to have pictures of what a primary school one might look like with actual pictures on it, or what that might look like in a high school where it might be a written visual schedule. But we will then have photos of those for the teachers so that they can then use those as resources in their own classrooms, and we'll link them, because it's electronic, we can link to all of those things and to other resources that will be of value. We'll also be linking to the general capabilities of the Australian National Curriculum, and we thought this was particularly important because teachers will already have a lot of resources and support to ensure they deliver the subject curriculum, but they've all been told they have to develop these general capabilities for their classrooms, and we felt that this project would be something that could actually help them to solve a problem. You know, if they're thinking about how on earth do I deliver all these general capabilities, well, we want to be saying, if you use the models of practice that we're suggesting to you, this will help you to deliver those. So it's presenting the teachers with a solution, and then hopefully finding a place in the curriculum for these practices that we hope will support transition. We'll also then link to the proficient level of the Australian professional standards for teachers. So again, it's making it very attractive to teachers so that we really want them to pick up these models of practice, to use them in their classroom, and for them to be sustainable. So we want them to talk to their colleagues, we want them to be embedded across schools so that they try a particular model of practice, they think it's fantastic, and they share it with their colleagues. And then year on year we hope that those students who are moving through the school are moving through into classrooms where teachers already have this level of support, both from the CRC project but also from their colleagues saying, I tried that, it worked really well, that would be a great one for you to use. So we hope that by putting these other supports in place, we're going to be making these practice briefs so attractive for teachers they won't be able to ignore them. We're hoping that it'll be something that they really want to use to support all students, but as I say, so that they make transition through school much easier for young people on the autism spectrum, so that we keep all of them together, all children together in their mainstream classrooms. We don't see children having to be necessarily excluded into special units or categorical classes, or for some young people being homeschooled because so many things aren't able to meet their needs in the school classroom. So what we hope is that if we put these things in place, we'll actually be able to make schooling much more attractive for all young people, but for those on the spectrum it just really supports them to manage these difficult transitions. So we are at the very beginning of this project. These are a lot of decisions we've made about how to make this project as a transparent and as useful as possible to classroom teachers, but we are now looking at what the models of practice will be, and we've already started to sort those and to see which ones we might actually take forward to be trialled. So we'll be trialling, as I say, in 3 states and in 3 different ways. So hopefully we will see some good responses from that. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Debra, for that outline of that project. And I was just reflecting while I was listening to Debra, and I really just want to say what we've done today is pick out 3 projects to talk about, but in our school years program we have many, many, many more, some of them smaller projects, some of them also very large projects. But we're just highlighting 3 today, and hopefully during the year we'll have the opportunity to other webinar series to describe and tell you a little bit more about other projects that we are working on. So I have just a memory jog for you. We are very, very happy to take questions. We have a few ahead of time, but please, if you want to put questions in the question pane on the right-hand side, we're happy to, while you've got this opportunity with these 3 experts with us today, if you have anything you want to ask, please let us know and we'll make sure we get through those at the end of the presentation. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Dr Renae Beaumont. Renee is a clinical psychologist and the developer of the Secret Agent Society social skills program for children with autism and other social emotional challenges. The SAS program arose out of Renee's PhD, and subsequently she's received a number of awards, including the 2014 Autism Spectrum Australia Recognition Award for Advancement and the 2014 United States Learning Magazine Teacher's Choice Award for the Family. The SAS computer game was also a finalist in the 16th Australian Interactive Media Industry Association Awards Best Learning and Educational Game of the Year. Renee's research focuses on the development and evaluation of tech-enhanced assessment and treatment tools for children on the autism spectrum and their families. She supervised clinical psychology trainees and research students over the last 10 years. And recently she has been spending time in New York at the Presbyterian Hospital at the Cornell Medical Centre, where she's due to return in the beginning of May. So it's great to have her here in April. And Renee has been advising on a number of randomised controlled trials in the United States that look at the use of Secret Agent Society in that environment. So today she's going to talk to us about a new intervention called the Whole of Classroom program. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Renee. Thanks, Sylvia.
So I'm very excited today to talk to you about some of the latest research developments with Secret Agent Society, both in terms of some of the research I've been involved in the States, but also our Whole of Class program, and also how that fits with some of the other projects you've just heard about around meeting educational needs of kids on the spectrum and helping with those transitions. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Secret Agent Society or SAS, it's a social emotional skills training program for kids, particularly in that 8 to 12-year-old age group, so sort of upper primary years. I originally developed it for my PhD in clinical psychology at the University of Queensland. And I guess the core values and ideas behind the intervention were to create something fun and engaging to help kids learn the skills they need to feel happier, calmer and braver and to make friends and keep them. And certainly at this point, this was over 10 years ago now that the very first version of the program was evaluated. But at that point there really wasn't anything available in terms of research, evidence-based social skills training that made a difference in these kids' lives. While they may lead to improvements in sort of laboratory tests, in terms of real-world changes and how these kids manage their feelings of anxiety and anger, their ability to actually make friends, the research was showing there really wasn't much around that was actually achieving those goals that are so important to families, to schools and to parents. So I took that on as my mission for my PhD, to try and create something to help these kids to realise their potential, to unlock those strengths, those abilities that they had and to overcome the social difficulties so that they could achieve their vision for their future as well. So the program, as I mentioned, the core concept behind it was I wanted it to be fun and engaging. I wanted kids to be running in excited to come to their club meetings, not parents having to drag them there saying, I don't want to go, this is boring, this is difficult. So really tapping into the learning interests and strengths of many kids on the spectrum. And that included creating a computer game. Many kids on the spectrum really are into technology, so that seemed like a great way initially to teach them the foundation skills around how to recognise emotions in themselves and in others, and how to solve some of the social challenges you've heard about already around coping with change, bullying and teasing, how to do group work or play and hang out with others. So using a computer game as a teaching tool, but then having a variety of other games and activities to help these kids then generalise and apply what they learn from the computer game to real life, with support for parents and also school staff, so they know how to help these kids actually put these skills into action when they need them at home with siblings or maybe at school with other kids in the class or at break time. And there have been several published research papers and evaluations of the program in its small group format and also the computer game as sort of a standalone tool itself. And it has been shown to be effective in helping kids to improve their anxiety, their anger, be able, help with some of the behavioural challenges kids can have at times, as well as their social skills when the program's delivered in clinic settings, in school settings, and also for rural and remote families who really struggle to maybe get to a clinic or to a facility where they're offering the program. So using Skype-assisted parent support and coaching so those families can get access to the program as well. So I did want to briefly discuss the US trial that's been underway that I've been involved in that Sylvia mentioned. So I have spent the last 6 months at Weill Cornell Medical College and New York Presbyterian Hospital, and we've done an evaluation, or we're in the process of it at the moment, of looking at how well does this program work, not only for kids who are on the spectrum, but kids who also have ADHD or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, anxiety difficulties, depression, so children with other mental health conditions, as well as autism spectrum disorder. So we have trialled the program across 3 different clinic sites, and we've trained 33 staff, including psychiatrists who are in training, psychologists and social workers. And what we've done is looked at how does this program compare to the gold standard of what they were already offering to kids in terms of therapy, support around some of these challenges they were having in making friends, in managing anxiety, in managing anger, in managing problems around attention and being very active, and looking at that across lots of different measurements and measures. So looking at changes in kids' ability to manage feelings like anxiety and anger, their ability to socialise and get along with other kids, how they're going with their behaviour in terms of being able to follow instructions, not getting really upset and frustrated when someone asks them to do something they don't want to do, and other core symptoms relevant to the different diagnoses that these kids have. Also, they're evaluating how happy and how much enjoyment kids are getting from the program, as well as parents and school staff. How is the program influencing attendance levels? So, if there's issues with kids and families not actually getting to clinic appointments, does this program lead to higher levels of attendance and program completion than other services that they've previously delivered? And importantly, how cost effective is it? Which for the policy and decision makers is an important factor. So I'd just like to finish up my session talking about the Secret Agent Society Whole of Class Program trial, which is being done through the Autism Cooperative Research Centre. So the aims of this particular program and the trial are to look at how well can this variation of the small group Secret Agent Society program, so we've adapted it so it's delivered to all grade 5 students by their classroom teacher. How well does it work in improving kids' social emotional functioning? And when I talk about kids, I'm talking about all grade 5 students, not just those kids who are on the spectrum, but we are shining a spotlight on those who are on the spectrum and those who have other social emotional difficulties as well, to see specifically how well does this work for them. How does it improve their ability to make friends and how well they're accepted by their peers? And also looking at if we are improving kids' ability to manage their feelings, their ability to get along with others, do group work, those sorts of challenges that Beth mentioned earlier in that social emotional space. How does that impact on academic outcomes? Because often, academic outcomes are a core priority for schools, for principals and for decision makers. So we want to look at what that link is like. So in terms of our timeline for this project, we're very excited to train our first group of teachers and teacher aides in the program just before Easter. So we trained 18 of those in the delivery of this whole class program variant. And really tapping back into what Beth was saying, really thinking about what teachers wanted in terms of both the program but also the training course. So in developing the program, we went out and met with school staff and said, look, what are the core social emotional areas that your students, you think they need some skills training in? What would be the best way for us to actually teach them those skills? And we were getting feedback like they want it to be fun and engaging, they want it to be games. So we very much made the program in that way. There's puzzles, there's group problem solving activities where they're cracking codes together as well as also the computer game. And we had some really wonderful teacher feedback from that training in terms of they found it was very hands-on, very practical. They got a chance to be in the role of both the teacher, pretending they were delivering the program to the class, but also pretending they were a student. So they could experience what it was like to be involved in participating in one of the class lessons in the program. So we have the trial being run in 8 schools across Queensland this year, and then next year we're branching out to schools in other states. So we're in the process at the moment of recruiting schools in New South Wales, Victoria and Western Australia to participate in the trial in 2017. We're also going to be following the cohort of kids who are on the spectrum from 2016 to 2017 to see how does it help them with that transition from grade 5 to grade 6. And then we'll hope to continue following that cohort or group of kids to 2018 when they're actually making that transition into high school, which can be such a challenge for many of them, and saying, look, can these skills help build their resilience and ability to cope with that transition as well? And then in 2018, obviously, we want to be sharing our findings with the community, and if the results are promising, then certainly making the program more widely available. So if you would like to find out more about Secret Agent Society, or if you're interested in finding out about training opportunities for your school, or if you're working in a clinic setting, or maybe you're a parent and thinking this might be valuable for my child, please go to the Social Skills Training Institute website. You can see the URL there on the slide, and you can find out more. Thank you, Renee. Okay, so we've had 3 very interesting presentations that focus on some of the key challenges experienced by students on the spectrum in school contexts. So I have a number of questions coming in, so I'll start with Debra, if that's okay.
Debra, there's a couple of questions for you. How are you going to choose the trial schools and teachers for the Transition Models of Practice project?
Well, basically we'll be talking to the Departments of Education or the Catholic Diocese in each state to ask whether they can, in the first instance, whether they could identify schools. So we need schools in metro and regional areas. And so rather than us just approach individual schools, we'd first of all go to people we already have partnerships with and ask them whether there are specific schools they might recommend that we approach. Obviously, if anyone's really interested in being part of this, we're quite happy for people to maybe to send us an email and say, you know, I work in a school where we have a lot of young people on the spectrum, we think this would be something we'd really like to be part of. That would be great, because then we can do it the other way around and go to the authority and say, well, these schools have shown an interest, can we approach? So, yeah, so basically we're just at the beginning of that process and we're just looking at identifying schools. So any advice people have of particular schools would be welcome, I think.
Great, thank you, Debra. And the other one is, how do some of the participants today find out about the project as it progresses over the next year or two? How could they stay in touch and find out what's happening?
Well, at the moment, hopefully there's information on the CRC website about the project and the project team, because this is a project that we've been working on putting together for well over a year with 6 different partners across a number of states, and so we've got a lot of people already involved in the project, and so all of that information will be on the CRC website. And then I guess if people are really interested to hear how the project is carrying on, the CRC does put out a newsletter, and we would be able to, I'm sure, put small updates into that to say we've now trialled these models of practice with the expert panel. We have 30 or 40 or whatever that we're going to trial in schools, or, you know, just to keep people up to date with what we're doing, and potentially even just to give a couple of examples of what the specific models of practice are, which I think would be of interest to people. So I'm sure we could organise all of that through the CRC.
Thanks, Debra. And just to let people know, if you're not registered for our newsletters, if you go to our website homepage, autismcrc.com.au, there's a link on the homepage that will let you register to obtain our newsletters regularly. So that's one way to keep in touch. And the other one is that we put out quarterly research updates, both electronically and in hard copy, where we focus on different projects and where they're up to and so forth. So there are a number of ways that we can continue to provide updates on how various projects are going. When our projects are finished, we will put a final report, an executive summary, snapshot, quick sort of 2-page information on the website. So there's a whole range of different amounts of detail you can find out about projects once they're completed. Okay, this is a question for Beth. Where can they get the ENA final report, and how quickly?
Okay, so the report's currently being finalised at the CRC office and should be released before the end of the month, and would be available via the CRC website.
Yeah. At the moment there's an executive summary there, but we are within that much of just getting the final report out. Okay, next question is for Renee. Is SAS available in online classes? I'm not sure whether this refers to the trainer, the program. Is the program available online so that students can do it online?
At this stage it's not. We have completed a trial just recently looking at providing online through Skype or phone assisted support to parents to support their child to play the computer game at home. But you know, the game itself isn't available online at the moment. We are certainly exploring at the moment options of having it be able to be purchased from online, but in terms of the full program, you know, the face-to-face delivery method is the one we've got the most research for, and that's where we're at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Renee. Another question about SAS. Is it Can it be used for severe autism or only mild to moderate?
So I think that the important question was there, are we talking about severe autism in terms of symptoms of communication difficulties or social difficulties, or are we talking about problems with maybe some challenges intellectually? So it is really designed more for kids who have IQ at least within normal range, who are 8 to 12. There are some adaptations of the accessing the program from a professional. They may be able to adapt and help them through it if they do have an intellectual delay, but it's really more designed for 8 to 12 kids with intellectual ability within the normal range.
And that's irrespective of the level of autism severity?
Yeah, that's right. So in terms of how significant their social difficulties are, hopefully it would still be of value.
Yeah, thank you. Another one for you, Renee. Do you know of any programs for younger children in the 3 to 6 year range who have issues with social skills and anxiety?
So there are a couple of research trials that are underway. I'm not sure where. Do you know the location of this?
No.
There's one at Queensland University, I know, where they're looking at trials for younger kids. But in terms of things that have gold standard, I'm not familiar with any that are based on child social skills training. It's probably a lot more working with the parents and the children as well. I'm not sure if Debra or yourself, Beth, had any further recommendations around that one.
Any thoughts, Debra?
Yeah, well, we actually at Autism Spectrum Australia, we do have a program that our educational outreach team has developed themselves that they use with primary age children. So we have a program that we use. We haven't done a big research trial on it or anything. It's just based out of practice and obviously with an evidence base to that. But that's the only one for younger children that I'm aware of at the moment.
Okay, thank you. A question here about, I'm going to keep it pretty open, programs for students with significant intellectual disabilities. And I know this is an area that comes up for us a lot. And, the need to broaden our research remit to include intellectual disability. But I'm not sure if Debra or Beth or Renee have any thoughts about any programs where we're not talking about the normal sort of typical range of cognitive ability.
I was just trying to look up something on the needs analysis because we actually ask.
I think with a lot of the Program 2 projects, because they're based in mainstream schools, we necessarily are looking at children who are more in the mild to moderate to even, obviously the very bright young people. And so a lot of the CRC projects, we know that this is an area we're not addressing, and we've talked about it in Program 2 before. It is quite difficult because a lot of those young people, if they've got significant additional needs, could well be in special classes, depending which state they live in. They might be in a special school or a special class. So maybe it's something we need to consider putting extensions on some of the projects to make sure we include those groups of young people, because at the moment, as I say, I don't think we're really covering it very well, are we? So.
And certainly the behaviour support project would definitely be working in that area. We did have a question on the needs analysis where we actually looked at was there any difference in adjustments or support required for children, at different areas of the spectrum. So, for example, we did look at students on the spectrum with an associated intellectual disability, and there was a lot of common themes that came out regardless of whether the children were perceived as academically gifted or with an intellectual disability. And some of the key things that come out across the spectrum regardless were the curriculum adjustments and differentiation that was required, but particularly for students on the spectrum with an associated intellectual disability, that curriculum adjustments and differentiation came out as quite important. And the individual support, including support staff, was considered very important, as well as trained staff to help. Whereas in comparison to the academically gifted, the differentiation was more around extension of the curriculum.
Debra, just one question for you. The research you've spoken about today focuses on transitions within the school day, and the query was why not focus on transitioning into school and out at the other end?
Yeah, and obviously when we first started talking about this project, they were some of the things we had looked at. But within the CRC, and we're only talking about education projects today, but Programme 1 is early intervention, and there's a longitudinal study also within the Programme 2 area, which is picking children up early and following them through for a number of years. And in Programme 3 there is actually projects that are looking at that post-school area. So we didn't want to, given this great opportunity to have a project on transition, we didn't want to be repeating something that's happening in other projects in the CRC. So we looked at where the needs really seem to be, and following on from the needs analysis, it's those we're not looking at the small scale transitions because we do have another project in Programme 2 which is looking at staying on task and moving between tasks, looking at elements of structured teaching as in teach. But what we wanted to do is to look at those transitions that young people have to do through the school day that are bigger scale or through the school year. And as I say, particularly through the school year, moving from years 7 to 8 and then 8 to 9, those are the areas where in our previous research that we've done at Aspect, we found that's where things start to fall apart because teachers think, oh, the kids are in the school now, they should know what they're doing. And so that's why we felt it was really important to concentrate on an area that isn't being looked at anywhere else.
Thanks, Debra. This question for you is just asking, you've probably answered it a little bit now, is your work just in primary school age children?
No, so there's, again, we've been lucky and put really what could have been 2 projects together in one in this transition project. So we have an early years and a middle years stream, and both of those are being organised with different theoretical constructs. So the primary school one is organised in the early years learning framework, the being, becoming, belonging, and for the secondary, the middle years, we've got a different organising framework that we've identified. And so there are like 2 projects working in parallel, so hopefully we'll cover both age ranges.
Great, thanks very much, Debra. So we're just about at the end of the hour. I'd like to thank our panel, Debra Costley from Aspect in Sydney, Renee Beaumont from the University of Queensland here in Brisbane, and Beth Saggers from Queensland University of Technology, for being with us today and presenting and answering a whole range of questions. Just a heads up that the presentation today has been recorded, and once we have the recording all sorted out, we will put it on our website. So again, autismcrc.com.au/autism spotlight. So autismcrc.com.au/autism spotlight. Tomorrow's presentation looks at some of our adult years programs or finding a place in society, and we'll have Professor Nick Lennox talking about health issues and the research they're doing, Associate Professor Kate Sofronoff talking about supporting students on the spectrum at university, and Melissa Scott talking about helping employers to support adults on the spectrum at work. So thank you for joining us today in the School Years program and for your questions and engagement through asking us questions, and we look forward to providing other webinars across the year to provide more information about updates on our research. Thank you very much.